Tony Perkins, great to see you again, this time on Zoom because of all of the quarantining going on. But thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be with you, David. We're learning to adapt in the age of the coronavirus.
For sure. Hey, speaking about adapting, that's exactly what you're going to be doing on Sunday. Big Easter service, but not the traditional Easter service in terms of getting folks actually in the pews. It's a bit different. Can you tell me about the plans that you and others have for Sunday down there in Louisiana?
Sure, David. You know, we've been working from the beginning to encourage pastors to think outside the box, the four walls of the church, and not, look inward. I mean, and this is a difficult time for churches. Having pastored a church back during natural disasters, you miss a couple of Sundays, and it really impacts the ministry opportunities of the church from a budgetary standpoint. And so, just encouraging pastors, look, don't think about what you can't do under these stay-at-home orders. You can't meet with more than 10 people. Think of what you can do within the guidelines. And I have to tell you, I'm very encouraged by what I see pastors doing across the country. And one of the things we promoted early on was doing drive-in services. I remember as a kid going to the drive-ins, the drive-in theaters. In fact, in the town I grew up in, Oklahoma, that's all we had for entertainment on Friday and Saturday night. We went to the drive-in. And I thought, well, churches have big parking lots. Why not do drive-in services? People stay in their car, come as you are in your car, and do a service that way. And so what we're doing, I actually got with some pastors in the community I live in, right outside of Baton Rouge in Central. And we're getting about 6 or 7 churches that are promoting this, and we're going to do a big drive-in sunrise service at the stadium parking lot, the high school stadium parking lot, biggest parking lot available, bigger than Walmart. And we're going to bring everybody in there. We're going to broadcast it on a local FM station so people can listen from the comfort of their car on the radio station.
Tony, tell me a little bit. I know you hosted that White House conference call with the president and the vice president, Ben Carson, others. Tell me a little bit about the church response overall to this. You did hint at it, obviously, at the beginning, but are they doing more of these, whether they be drive-in services? What are you seeing in the church community in terms of different and various ways churches being held?
Well, it's, it really took a lot of pastors by surprise. I mean, they weren't expecting, meeting one Sunday and then the next being told that you can't meet. I mean, it came about quite suddenly without much planning. Mm-hmm. What I have found, it was interesting, again, having been, in South Louisiana most of my life and going through a number of natural disasters going back to the Katrina in 2005, churches in the South are kind of accustomed to responding to these crises when they arise. Mm-hmm. In other parts of the country, not so much so. And so it took a while to get the footing, but there's been some very creative ideas. We've had pastors that have just been in their parking lots on Sundays, and cars have come through, and they've prayed for families as they've come through, just putting hands on their cars and praying for them. We've had, obviously, the Facebook Live and the webcasting has grown has had phenomenal growth. Some pastors telling me that their viewership has grown exponentially during this time. We've had, the drive-in theaters. But then we've had ministry opportunities, which is really encouraging, where many churches have turned their daycares that were closed over to daycares, obviously limited in number, but to care for the first responders' children, so that they could go to the hospitals, so that they could be, the policemen and the firemen, because their kids are at home. So we've seen that. We've seen taking care of the elderly, where they're the ones that are at high risk, they're shut in. So the young people who are out of school or have extra time, taking groceries, taking medicines, critical supplies to them. So many, many different ways of opportunity to minister, and some just calling. A lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, and just calling and praying with people. Some have turned their staff into prayer lines. They've got staff, so they're just having them field prayer calls and just praying for people in the community that are, unsettled and anxious by the uncertainty that we're facing.
Tony, so many churches are stepping to the plate in those ways, and obviously closing the church doors as it relates to Sunday services and people not coming into the pews. Obviously, down there in Louisiana, I need to ask you about this. Pastor Tony Spell, who over at Life Tabernacle Church has decided to, in essence, go against the stay-at-home order issued by the governor. Can you give me your take on that? And he's given lots of different reasons for doing it, but I'd be curious how much you know him and what this the
I'm
terrain
very
down
familiar
there.
with it. In fact, it's just around the corner from my house. And when it first came up, the sheriff called me and asked me if I would talk with Pastor Spell. I am familiar with him. In fact, helped his church back during the flood when President, then candidate Trump came down here to my church, and we raised some money to help in the relief effort. I gave money to our church that raised the money, gave money to local churches, including Pastor Spell's church. So I am familiar with him, know him. I've talked with him multiple times. In fact, went to see him with the sheriff and encourage him not to meet, but to explore other alternatives. In fact, I had arranged with the local Christian station if he would be willing not to meet. The Christian station agreed to air his Sunday message so that his parishioners, some of which are children some 600 that he buses in from the inner city, that he said does not have internet. I said, well, they can have access to an FM station, and we'll air your message on the FM station if you just would not meet. And this is important. Look, I understand religious freedom, and
Right.
and that's one of the reasons the sheriff called me. I mean, I'm the chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. I travel to some of the worst places in the world to advocate for religious freedom. What's happening in this jurisdiction is not an issue of religious persecution or restriction of religious freedom. The message is not being restricted. It's just the meeting, and it's being applied across the board. I know all of the officials involved. I've worked with them. And this is an issue of endangering the community. Louisiana has one of the highest rates of death. In fact, second only to New York per capita in terms of the deaths from the COVID virus. In fact, my daughter, who is a trauma nurse in the local largest hospital, volunteered to work in the COVID unit in the
Wow.
emergency room. And so I'm getting reports every day, even though she's had to self-quarantine when she's not working. She's living in a travel trailer so as not to infect others. But I mean, this is real. And part of Pastor Spell's initial reaction was this was just political. It was created. It's not political. It wasn't made up. It's real. People are dying from this. And my concern was a lot of these inner city children live with elderly grandmothers and grandparents who are susceptible disproportionately to the effects of this virus. And it's disappointing that he continues to meet and would not respond to what I think was very reasonable requests from the officials. Again, not targeting the message at all, but simply
Right.
the meetings as they've applied it across the board.
Tony, do you get any sense that there'll be any budging on his part, or do you think
No,
he's pretty dug in? He's dug in.
I think he's dug in. I think, you know, for those that aren't familiar with the backstory, and what I've told you has actually not been really publicized in any way, that we went the officials, you know, asking for my assistance, we went overboard to try to help him continue his ministry, get his message out there while protecting the health and welfare of the community. But he's become kind of a a symbol of resistance to tyrannical government. And I'm not saying that there are not places where some are taking advantage, like the mayor of New York, who said, if the synagogues didn't shut down, they would shut them down permanently.
Right.
Now, whether he misspoke or was overly zealous, he's never clarified to my knowledge, but that's not happening here. And if it were, believe me, I would be standing on the side of Pastor Spell. But in this case, it is not that. It is an issue of the well-being of the public.
Tony, not that you're in official capacity with the governor's office, but I am curious about some clarification on the stay-at-home order, because it does say, unless I'm reading this incorrectly, I actually read the order. It says it does allow for an exemption of going to and from an individual's place of worship.
Right.
Now, clearly, some people are taking that to mean, well, we'll go to church then. But
Well, here's the deal. And I'm glad the governor put that in there, because it's not, it shows there's no hostility toward religious expression. Some want to go to their church and pray. Some churches have opened their doors to allow people to come in, a few people, meeting the limit of no more than 10 to come into their church and pray, to come periodically for the sacraments, however they want to do it, have drive-in services, as we've talked about. So the point was not to limit movement. It also recognizes that clergy have the right to go to their churches to do their ministry. So that's what that was focused on. It was not focused on, oh, nothing's changed, you can still have 2,000 people in a meeting. The meeting requirements are still there under this temporary order, but the ability to go back and forth is not restricted.
Tony Perkins, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate your time. I don't know if there's anything else you feel like you need to add. There's so much to talk about biblically and from a fear perspective during this time, but and maybe you'll give me your thoughts on that before we close, but I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to share, Tony.
Well, just for the readers and the viewers that are in our area, I certainly invite them to come and join us at 7 a.m. for a sunrise service this coming Sunday at the Central Stadium, high school football stadium, for a 1-hour service, community service. There'll be prayer, there'll be worship, and a word of inspiration for all those who want to come together and join us in their cars, keeping their social distance, but we'll be drawn closer to God.
Tony Perkins, a pleasure to see you, whether it be on Zoom or in person. Good to see you, sir.
Thanks, David. Good to be with you.